When setting up payroll and time, what you want to do is navigate to the Setup menu at the top of the screen, My Company, Information and Settings. Now here in this window, there's a very specific area for payroll and time. This is where you're going to set up not only your pay period for reporting purposes, but various other time options. So to just walk through these tabs, the very first one we ever hear are your payroll settings. This is a place where you can set up and structure how reports will reflect your payroll periods. So if it's weekly and it ends on Friday, this would be a good example. But it could be bi-weekly. If, for example, it's a semi-monthly pay period, what you'll want to do is actually choose Custom, and then down here populate the days that it begins. So for example, if your begin dates or fall within, for example, here we have one is the first of the month would be the first day and the 15th would be the second period. So this allows you to kind of customize and control what your pay periods are going to be. And again, how this is reflected in the software is that when you run a payroll report, it'll actually pull from these values. Now there's one other option here, which is the overtime rules. And there's two options in here. One is for federal and the other is for California. Because in California, the overtime rules are actually structured to be not only 8 hours a day, but 40 hours a week. So you can control that here from this menu. If for some reason you need to make a change to your time cards or make a change to these settings, you can actually have this retroactively go back and adjust existing time cards. So the next tab at the top of the screen are the time settings. This is where you can actually customize a small note that will appear on a printed timesheet, which has a signature line just below it. This allows you to put in a note that will have, for example, staff acknowledge something about their timesheet. The example here is that we've taken all of our breaks and lunches, but perhaps it's something like, I verify that all my time is posted and correct. In addition to that, we have an area where you can track the mileage if that's something that you do in your firm. And rounding. One important thing about rounding as far as the best practice is we do actually recommend that you round your actual time. You have some options here, round to the 10th and round to the 100th. A lot of offices will want to round this time or push the intervals to, for example, 5 minutes, 10, 15 minutes. If you want to do that, we highly recommend that you actually do that under the billable time section, not the actual time. And the reason being is if we have a staff member who tracks 8 hours of time, we want it to display 8 hours of actual time. Sure, the billable amount may be at the 5, 10, 15, 20-minute increments, but we want the actual time to be as accurate as possible. Some other options in here, for example, are to require a project or case matter on the timesheet. And what this does is it forces you to have a project before you can track time. So you're not able to simply track time based on a contact and a work code. You also need to have a project. You can also do that with active assignments. You can display the budgets. And one other option here is to show completed projects when entering time. Typically, I would not recommend this setting. The reason being is it would actually show projects that have already been marked complete. And by having this function turned on, somebody may inadvertently track time for a completed project. However, if you need that functionality, obviously you want to go ahead and turn it on. And probably one of the more important features on this screen is actually this last checkbox, which is to disable cancel on time cards. What this will do is once a time card is generated in the system, and that's done in a couple ways, but the most common way is simply by checking something off of your activity list and it populating a time card for you. With this option checked, that time card would not be able to be canceled. It would actually be grayed out. This in turn forces people to actually track time. The downside to this is perhaps you completed something that you've already tracked time for and now you have a time card that you can't exit out of. So use this with caution, but if you need to force the time card entry, then you may want to turn this option on. The last tab here under other settings is where you can control what events will receive this automatic time card. So you can turn them on and off at your discretion. For example, if I never wanted to track time for phone calls, I could simply turn that off. And then when I completed a phone call, that auto time card would simply not appear. Now, in most cases, we recommend that you have all of these turned on and then you just decide whether you want to track time or not. Some other really good options here on this screen are to restrict time card entries to clients only. Meaning, if you have a contact set up in the system with anything other than the client contact type, they will actually not appear in the menu where you're able to track time, forcing you to only track time for contacts who are categorized as clients. The other two options here have to do with the timers. One is to allow individual timers only, meaning only one timer at a time. The second option will actually allow you to have two timers up simultaneously, but it will pause the second timer when you create a new one. Now, without these options turned on, by default, the system will actually allow you to have two timers running concurrently. Now, the reason you would want to do that is, for example, maybe you're on hold with the IRS, yet you're productive, so you're doing something else at the same time. So that's obviously a decision that you can make based on your needs for timers. And the last setting here that's blocked out is a very important one. This will actually restrict time card entry based on a value of days. The reason this is important is because in Office Tools, in the Practice Management Workspace, we don't block off or post time based on periods. For example, there's no month one billing, so to speak. So what you may find yourself needing is a restriction on how far back people can go and change their time cards. Now, obviously, what this range is going to be is completely up to you, but perhaps maybe in our example here, we have 7 days. So what this would mean is me as a staff member would only be able to go back 7 days and make any changes to my time card. If I wanted to go back, for example, 2 weeks, I would actually not be able to do that. Now, there are user rights that override this function, and those user rights specifically are for timesheet managers and anyone marked as a system admin. They can actually override this restriction. So what this would do is force staff members who perhaps aren't tracking their time to then go and actually be held accountable and go to a timesheet manager or a system admin to have those changes inputted. So these are the payroll and time settings, and again, this is something that you're going to want to do at the very beginning of the setup because it's going to affect reports, it's going to affect how your time gets rounded as you're tracking time, and what values and what fields show up while you're tracking that time.